Kinhaven was quite significant. I would say even to this day, many of my friends and acquaintances I either met at Kinhaven or at Juilliard pre-college. And actually, I now realize there's a very important Milken Archive recording thing that happened there, which is I met Lucy Shelton there. And Lucy, who sings on my Milken Archive recording, Ladino songs, she was the activities counselor at Kinhaven, and she did some singing, and she had been a flutist, actually, but she was doing some teaching, and Lucy and I became very close, and it stayed a friendship for many years. Another relationship to the recording that has Lucy on it, also on that recording, is Elliot Fisk. Mm-hmm. I met him at Kinhaven also. And I had my guitar with me. So that summer, I was there to play bassoon in the orchestra and play piano and do some composing. But I brought a viola that I rented from my high school, and I brought a classical guitar, which I owned, and I was playing folk music on it. So I had all this stuff with me. Mm-hmm. And I heard during the first few hours that I was walking around the campus of Kinhaven, which is in Vermont, that there's this kid who's my age, who is a guitar phenomenon, and he's the only guitarist in the camp, and they've never had a guitarist before because there's not a lot of chamber music and he can't be in the orchestra, but they're going to do a couple of concertos with him, and he is going to play some chamber music, and his name is Elliot Fisk, and he's just incredible, and he can play Scarlatti sonatas written for the keyboard on the guitar. So I thought, wow, that's unbelievable. So I had my guitar out, and I was just tuning it, and I was going to play for myself, and I see this guy with a guitar. I think this must be Elliot Fisk coming towards me. So I decided, which is a little bit how I was at this time, that I would pretend that I was a great classical guitarist also. So he comes towards me, and he said, I thought I was the only guitar student. I said, no, you're not the only guitar student. And I said, are you Elliot? And he said, yeah. Who are you? I said, I'm Bruce. And I said, I'm just thinking about what I want to play. He said, well, what repertoire are you playing? So I thought I'd really nail it. And I said, I'm playing, the Beethoven piano sonatas. I play those. He said, on the guitar? I said, yeah, why not? I mean, I have to change things, but he said, can I hear you play this? And I kept it up for a long time, sort of doing this kind of Ed Norton, I'm about to play the guitar thing without actually playing it. And then finally I played an F major bar chord, and he went, oh, I see. You're kidding. Yeah. So we became friends then, too. There's a very significant aspect of my life that you would never ask me about because you wouldn't know, which is that I had a really serious hand accident when I was 19, because we've gone up to that and past that point and around, and that I still have tremendous difficulty using this hand. And so when I play the piano, I'm actually using only 4 fingers on this hand, and I have no lateral motion. And it's because I cut nerves in here with a glass door. It was just an accident, which turned out to be very serious. And luckily, by that point, this was 1974. By that point, I was absolutely sure I wanted to be a composer because the piano playing was severely affected by it, and I've never really recovered. So when I play the piano posers, I write them so I can play them. Sometimes I can barely play them, or I fake them or things, but there's a lot of music that I used to be able to play that I can't. But since I'm a composer, I often rearrange things while I'm playing them, and people don't necessarily know that. But it is a frustration, and I had to give up the bassoon for the same reason, because the hand position was one that I just couldn't actually do anymore. So with my parents dying and that happening all around the same time, that had a profound effect. And the effect actually was that I became a survivor personality, like some people who have a Holocaust situation. I just always needed to work, always to make sure everything was okay, that money was coming in, that I was playing, because I didn't have parental support, and I didn't have what I thought was going to be the easiest bread and butter, which was I was going to play accompany singers, just play anybody who wanted a pianist, I would be the pianist. Now I couldn't do that. So instead, I turned my attention to composing for film scores, documentaries, mostly writing for PBS, writing for Smithsonian World, and doing short projects like that, working for the theater. And it ended up being great. Yeah. And I don't regret anything. I'm sorry that happened, but it turned me into somebody who spent a lot of time in many fields related to music, and I got lots of interesting experiences.
You were already on a path toward becoming a composer.
Totally.
You felt this pushed you even.
It's not that it pushed me. It's not that it pushed me further. It just cut off another side that would have been easy. I mean, for a while I thought maybe I'd play bassoon in an orchestra to make a really, a good orchestra and make a solid living, and to be completely free to compose aside from that. And then I thought maybe I'd rather be an available pianist, or play in a new music ensemble and accompany singers and team up with a violinist. But by the time I was 19, I realized, after that accident, that's not going to happen. So in a sense, I haven't felt totally comfortable with this hand since then. But I'm so used to it that I almost forgot to mention it, and I often do. And very few people know about it. And the first time I played in public after this happened was in the early 90s. I think it was early 90s. I had written some songs for Sylvia McNair, and I was rehearsing them with her. But my intention was that they would be played by someone else. So after she learned all the songs and we were having fun with them, I said, so who would you like? I've got 3 pianists you can do this with. And she said, what are you talking about? Aren't we doing it? I said, no, I don't perform in public. And she said, why not? We should do it. So then I didn't tell her right at that moment that there was a reason. And I thought, maybe I should. If Sylvia McNair is not sure, and I'm sitting right here playing this, maybe I should do it. So I did. And it just changed my life. It was great. And I felt fantastic. And I realized there was a lot I could still do. And I do play. I perform quite a bit. It's strange, but I can't perform the same level and all the repertoire I would have done, but I have a nice, fun life playing the piano.
Yeah. It's a big part of what you do, it seems.
It is, actually, yeah.
Can I ask what happened in the accident?
Well, I knocked open a glass door in a rush using my hand and my foot, and it was plate glass. This was in Aspen, Colorado. And it's actually, that glass is now illegal in all doors, not because of me, but it so happens that there were so many accidents with this kind of glass.
You're not the only one who ever did that.
Right. And it broke. It was the kind of glass that if you have a picture frame and it breaks easily, that was what was in the door. And a piece of it fell down from the top like a guillotine and cut my hand almost off. And I would have died, except some guy, I don't know his name now, and I didn't know who he was then, pulled his shirt off and made a tourniquet around that was unbelievably tight and professional. And he must have known what he was doing. And he and a friend of mine drove me to the Aspen Hospital on a Sunday afternoon. So there was one surgeon on call. He wasn't there. So I had to wait an hour for this guy to show up, and he said that this was not the kind of thing he normally does, but he sewed it all up. And then about 9 weeks later in New York, I had to have a lot redone because it was emergency. And I remember not having any idea how serious it was. I just didn't know. I said, will I be able to play the piano after this? And he said, probably not. And I thought, I can't believe he said that, and that was the beginning of a whole new phase of my life. But, yeah. I had some very good teachers who did influence me, but they weren't my biggest influences. I mean, when I was at Juilliard in the college, I studied with Vincent Persichetti, who was a good teacher, and I studied with Milton Babbitt, who was also a very fine teacher. I don't write like Persichetti and I don't write like Babbitt, but that didn't prevent them from being great teachers. I'm not sure that the biggest influences are composers. But if that's the question first, I was a very close friend of Nicholas Maull. He was a British composer. He died a few years ago. And there were certain things about him that I found very powerfully influential. My music does not sound like his. He was very British music and inflected by Strauss and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with what I write, although I love his music. But what I got from him was he really didn't care what anybody else was writing. He really didn't care about trends, stylistic categories. I mean, he was so involved with his own idea of music. And of course, you would think that should be true. It's obvious. But, you get pulled at from all these different sides and people wanting things or expecting things. And I found it rejuvenating in a strange way. He's much older than I am. He was. And but I just found his incredible commitment and his story inspiring, partly because he was really popular as a young man in England as a composer, and then he sort of fell out of favor, and then he was treated like an old-fashioned composer. But before he died, all of a sudden a lot of his music was being played. Big commissions came in. His opera Sophie's Choice was a huge success. And he hadn't changed what he was doing. It's just the world changes, and it came back to where he was. So, and I thought that was really interesting to see. I have a fondness for composers who can play. And in my case, because of the hand accident, I don't play as much, but I really express myself at the piano. And I do like the relationship between performing and composing. I think that's important. And I mention that only because there are a lot of great composers who don't play, and that's fine. But I think that for audiences and also for a certain kind of relationship to music, there's something really great about a composer who also takes time to perform. Even if you don't perform your own music, you perform something, so you know what that feels like to go out there. I couldn't name composers who suffered by not playing, but I'm not going to do that.
Since you brought up some of the Jewish pieces, as a composer, do you approach these any differently than you would any other piece?
Well, the thing that's different about it, maybe there are two things. One is that there is a vocabulary available that can become part of the piece. So, for example, with the Joachim Prince concerto, the violin, which represents Prince, can use cantorial inflection and also Jewish violin writing, which people know what that means when they hear it. So having a vocabulary that refers to something is a very powerful tool, which could become corny or exciting, or it can become anything. It can be a bad idea, but it's a good idea if you feel connected to this music and you're not using it on the surface. And since I grew up with it, I feel very connected to it, and it's an opportunity to use a musical vocabulary to make a point, and that is something that you don't have in every kind of composition. Another way it's different is that I know people who listen to it will think that there's a Jewish aspect to the music, and this is a Jewish composer. So I want to do that extremely well, and I want it to be really serious, and I want it to be at a very high level. But not that I don't want that with my other pieces, but I feel like I'm representing more than myself when I do this. And that's actually a good feeling. I mean, I feel like it's coming for and of a community, and so I don't want to take it lightly. And it's not that I take other composing lightly, but it's not like I'm speaking for anyone else. And I feel like this carries a little more weight. The reactions often are like that. I mean, the Joachim Prince piece, the concerto, has been getting very powerful reactions, partly because of who Prince was, but also because my connection to him and the Jewish element, and the fact that people can hear it. They get the story right away. So I feel like there is an extra weight, but a good weight, attached to it. Some people who know my music only know the funny stuff, like piano puzzlers or something for kids. And some people have only heard the Joachim Prince concerto or the piano concerto, which is extremely serious, or some of my string quartets, which tend to be dark. And then they find out that there's this other kind of stuff, and they what is this? Are you a split personality? I mean, I think all of us have a wide range of possibilities as creators. But I have tended to isolate these things a little bit so that because I write so much music for educational purposes for kids, this is a great place to put comedy. And, my childhood was fantastic except for the deaths of my parents. If you want to, in other words, there were 2 tragedies and then my hand accident. So there were 3 tragedies. But other than that, it was a loving family. It was a fun place to be. It was cultured. We did great things. So, and my father was extremely funny. And so I grew up feeling good. And then he died, and then my mother died, and I had this hand accident right before she died. And I felt that I felt the full weight of these losses and the tragedy of it. And at the same time, I never lost the sense that I wanted to be Danny Kaye when I grew up. My 3 favorite people of the outside world were Danny Kaye, Victor Borge, and Leonard Bernstein. And I wanted to be all of them. So in a way, I've tried to do that. I mean, I do a lot of educating in the Leonard Bernstein, not in his tradition, but in the trajectory that comes out of that tradition. I do keyboard comedy, which is not the same as Victor Borge, but that's who first gave me the thought that you could go up in front of an audience and do something and they might laugh. And I thought, okay, I love that. And then with the Bernstein, there was also the serious composing. And Danny Kaye, I must say, my Inspector Pulse character owes a lot to Danny Kaye. So I feel like the comedy that I wanted to do, I wanted to be funny, but I also wanted to not ignore the things that made me see the tragedy in life firsthand. And so balancing that is difficult, but it also keeps me going, those two things.
Time for another piano puzzler. Every week, Bruce Adolphe takes a familiar tune and rewrites it in the style of a classical composer.
I'm smiling because probably the thing I get asked the most in my life is, how did the piano puzzlers appear? And it makes sense. These are certainly the most popular thing I've ever been involved in. Over 1 million listeners a week. There are almost 200,000 podcast subscribers. And basically, it's a party trick that I've taken to a very advanced level, because I know a lot of pianists and composers who do things like this. But instead of doing it the way you would do it at a party, I write them out meticulously and I refine them so they have many layers of jokes, and so they're not just an improv. But they started that way. So when I was starting to teach theory at Juilliard, first in the pre-college, I found that a lot of musicians are resistant to studying theory, especially performers, because it takes some magic away, they think. So I thought, well, let's make it more fun and more mysterious, and then we can take some layers away. And the piano puzzlers, which were not called that, were originally a homework assignment where I would say, here's a tune, everybody try to write it so it sounds like Brahms, this tune, and let's see what we do. So every time I gave them an assignment, I would also do it, and then I started to collect some really funny things. And then when I got to Lincoln Center, I realized that they were a perfect way to entertain a large audience that was coming to a lecture, but they didn't really want a serious lecture, right before a concert. So I would say, we're about to hear some Mozart, and on the second half is Stravinsky. Now, what if they wrote a piece together based on the tune by Haydn in the middle of the concert? So I would do something crazy like that. The audience would love it. And then I'd deconstruct it, and a woman named Anya Grundmann from National Public Radio was in the audience one time, and she came up to me and said, you got to do that on the radio. So I did it. Originally, it was just a one-off, and Fred Child interviewed me, and then they said, you seem to have more of these in your bag sticking out, so I did a few more. And then I said to Fred, I can keep doing this. And so we had to come up with a name for it and decided to make it a game show. And we came up with lots of different names, but Piano Posters was the only one that wasn't somehow offensive. Like there was keyboard collisions, and they said, well, that's violent. There were all kinds of problems, but Piano Posters were kind of fun.
That was PC enough.
Yeah, that's right. And it didn't conjure up any bad images. And so now it's 15 years. In 2017 is the 15th year of Piano Posters.
So, Jim, what do you think?
I'm thinking Bach.
What about the tune that's buried in that Bach C minor prelude?
It reminds me of one of those Jewish tunes like Hava Nagila.
Yeah, that's what it is. It is Hava Nagila. That's right.
Jim, you got everything. You got the tune, you got the composer. Very well done.
Working with Fred Child has made it so I want to keep doing it, because he's really good at guessing them. He's great with the audience. He's very inspiring to be on the radio with, and lots of fun. And he makes it feel like we're Click and Clack, the car talk brothers. If I were doing it by myself, I think it would have stopped a long time ago. But having a click-clack relationship with Fred is really fun.
I'm so glad that you do this for us every week. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Fred.